caste system, teachers, and it was so expansive that once they went after debassification, they removed all the civil servants. There was no institutional memory. There was no competent technocrats. So there's a lot of, I think, parallels and bits and pieces that one can take. And there are also, of course, a lot of countries that are very recent in the region, like Libya, that stand out, that really kind of, fortunately descended into chaos. And that was, I think, just complete Western neglect, moving on completely and letting, various forces in the region form backers. And so it's really primed, if you will, for, a proxy battle, which is, I think, something we really need to avoid.
If you're just joining us here on the Sunday Magazine, I'm joined by political scientist Besma Momani and longtime Middle East correspondent Kareem Shaheen. Kareem, the other country that we haven't really talked about in the region is Israel. Since Assad's ouster, Israel has launched airstrikes against Syrian military assets. Today, the Netanyahu government has approved a plan to expand settlements on the Israeli-occupied Golan Heights. It wants to double the Israeli population on the Golan. Where does that fit into this larger picture?
It's really an unfortunate series of events. The Israelis, of course, when the regime fell, they took over additional land in the demilitarized zone near the Golan Heights. They've also conducted a very wide-ranging campaign of bombing Syrian conventional military capabilities, as well as some chemical weapons facilities that have belonged to the regime. And it's unfortunate that these chemical weapons facilities were not bombed prior to the regime's fall, when it was actively using it against its own citizens. It's really it's opportunistic. It's unfortunate that Israel's first steps in the immediate aftermath of the fall of the Assad dynasty is to bomb Syria, to occupy Syrian land. Israel, of course, is concerned that there's going to be a continuation of supply routes from Iran through Syria and into Lebanon. When the current leader of Hezbollah came out yesterday in speech and said that the group had lost its supply route through Syria, that there is no credible threat to Israel there, because the rebels have been fighting Hezbollah and they've been fighting Iranian militias for most of the past 13 years. And so they certainly have no interest in continuing to allow these weapons supply efforts to continue. And Al-Jilani himself put out a statement yesterday saying that Syria's new rulers have absolutely no interest in fomenting a conflict with Israel. And yet, the first letter that they sent to the UN Security Council this past week was to complain of Israeli violations of Syrian sovereignty. The only way one can see Israel's actions currently is that they're completely opportunistic. It's the use of violence to resolve any potential future conflict in the region.
Yeah, Al-Jilani told Syrian TV Besma that Israel has no more excuses to carry out airstrikes in Syria, and that Israel attacks in Syria and so have crossed red lines. Israel, of course, will say it's doing it for its own security, that it needs to do this. How volatile is this part of the situation?
Very. And I think you can't ignore the reality that Netanyahu's cabinet is ultimately, composed of many extremist, alt-right, expansionist members. And this is really troubling. I mean, one just needs to look and see the kind of vitriol that's coming out of that cabinet with regards to resettling Gaza, expanding and settlements in the West Bank. I mean, settlers in the West Bank have gone on pogroms, and to say that on the Golan, I mean, it's just extremely, extremely troubling. It's absolutely, as Kareem said, opportunistic. And I think, the fact that the West hasn't really put its foot down when it comes to Netanyahu's war on Gaza is indicative here. And this is really troubling, because I think, the region does not need more conflict. And I think just empowering Netanyahu to continue his expansionist policies is extremely worrying.
I want to ask you both about the refugee situation out of Syria, because there are millions of Syrians who have fled in the last decade plus, 100,000 or so coming to Canada. And there are, again, debates about this, about what, not Canada says the doors are still open and we welcome refugees, but Europe, we're seeing some different approaches to this. What is your sense of what the world should be doing with the many, many Syrian refugees in Korea?
Well, I think it's unfortunate that Europe spent for so many years was saying that Assad is a guarantor of stability, not recognizing that the brutality of the regime towards ordinary Syrian civilians is what was driving so many people to flee. Nobody wants to leave home, but they will if if the children's lives are being threatened. And it's so ironic that the second that Assad fell, all of these Western governments decided that they're going to suspend, processing Syrian asylum applications. I have no doubt that a lot of Syrians will want to return home, particularly those in Turkey. But it's also important for Western societies to realize that that a lot of these Syrian professionals who are living in countries like Germany, in Canada, and elsewhere have expertise that these societies need. Many of them are doctors, many of them are engineers, many of them are highly skilled professionals. And them leaving is going to add additional pressure on things like the healthcare systems that are collapsing in a lot of parts of the West.
additional help from audio technician Emily Carvalho. Our senior producer is Howard Goldenthal. Our executive is Brian Colton. I'm Leah Chattanooga. Thank you for lending us your ear. Sunday.
In the West End. I was looking at it. I think it'd be really awesome to put hockey card collection together.
We're cheering on some indigenous hockey heroes from the Bingo Hall to the Hall of Fame, from hockey cards to hockey leagues, honoring legends of the past and creating new ones for the future.
Unreserved with Rosanna Deerchild this afternoon at 2:30 in Newfoundland or Mountain and Pacific, and on demand on CBC Listen. And then it's What on Earth with Laura Lynch.
While most Canadians are focused on the Canada-US border to the south, today we're going north to look at how the boundary with Alaska is raising questions for some First Nations about mining and the climate.
Good morning, it's 11 o'clock. I'm Jay Turble. Healthcare system is running a large deficit, and Health Minister Christian recently handed an agency was tasked with balancing the budget, but now his plan to cut services is being questioned. In a letter obtained by Radio Canada, the Deputy Health Minister has asked the head of Santé Québec to review cuts related to home care services. The exact extent of the cuts is still unknown. They have yet to be made public, but they have to be done by March 2025. Ingrid Kovich is a president of the McGill University Health Center's Patients Committee. She says any cuts to health would have a negative impact.
I'm also, on a wait list for hip replacements. So I share everybody's, really profound concern that wait times are going to be increased, that access is going to be more and more difficult, if not impossible. So you can well imagine that there's a certain degree of panic from patients and families.
A spokesperson for Santé Québec told Radio Canada that the agency's proposed cuts won't affect access to essential services. There's some good news for people who fled Ukraine after Russia's invasion of the country. The Quebec government will be extending their health insurance. Ukrainians who came to the province were granted special permits, which were set to expire at the end of 2027, but that will now end in March of 2028. The province is still negotiating with the federal government to foot the bill. It's still a little-known healthcare service that was introduced during the pandemic, but now the psychosocial service offered by the 811 hotline is seeing a new spike in calls in the Quebec City region. And the Regional Health Agency wants more people who may need help to know about the service. Shuyi Lee reports.
It works the same as the 811 Info Santé line. Just dial 811 and press the right button for the psychosocial service Info Social.
Pour le service Info Social, appuyez sur le 2.
Info Social Capitale Nationale, ici Sandra Travail Social. Comment puis-je vous aider?
Social worker Sandra Aymon has been working the phones for the past 3 years.
Ça peut être, exemple, les conflits dans les familles, problèmes de dépendance.
It could be a family problem, an addiction problem, problems with depression or anxiety, she says. Aymon uses guidelines to help people and identify their needs. It could be referrals to community organizations or services.
Comment qu'on peut l'aider avec ses moyens à elle?
The Quebec City Regional Health Authority says the Info Social team received 65,000 calls last year alone.
Depuis 2020, il y a une augmentation de 60% du volume d'appels.
The head of the health authority, Josiane Gaudet, says since 2020, they've seen a 60% increase in the number of calls. Almost 2/3 of the calls are from women. Gaudet says they're encouraging men to use the service.
Fait qu'on encourage les hommes là, à utiliser le service infosocial.
Gaudet says seeking help is a sign of strength, not weakness. Shu Yili, CBC News, Montreal.
In international news, Mozambique is being battered by a powerful storm. Cyclone Chido slammed into the east coast early today, and that's after pummeling the French territory of Mayotte near Madagascar on its way. About 300,000 people live in Mayotte. Many are in tin roof shacks, which have reportedly been flattened by the storm. At least 11 people have been killed. Tens of thousands have lost their homes. Electricity, water, and internet connections are all down. France is sending emergency supplies and personnel. Brazil's president has been discharged from hospital after surgery to stop brain bleed. Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva left hospital today and on doctor's orders headed for home for some rest. The 79-year-old Lula underwent a second surgical procedure Thursday for an intracranial hemorrhage. His medical team says the surgery went well. And that was the CBC News. In the weather, Montreal, Laval becoming a mix of sun and cloud near noon and a high of -6. Cloudy tomorrow and a high of +3. Quebec City, a 40% chance of flurries, a high of -9. A few clouds tonight and a low of -14. In the townships, a high of -6 today. Wind chill making it feel like -23 this morning. Partly cloudy tonight, a low of -8. And for tomorrow, a high of +3 under a mix of sun and cloud. Laurentians, a high of -5 today. Tomorrow, cloudy and a high of 1. Gaspé Percé, 0.
Man, I love that sound.
So beautiful and soothing, right?
Oh man, it sure is. This is producer Molly Siegel in our What on Earth studio where we're kind of blissing out right now.
Hi, Laura.
Hi, where are we right now?
This is Sitka, Alaska, which is a community of about 8,000 people on 2 islands northwest of Haida Gwaii on the Pacific coast. When I was
meet another and brush each other's horns, they might be exchanging information about the salinity, the salt level of the waters through which they have just passed, which means that they might be map makers, which I just think would be an extraordinary thing.
Yeah, this is the thing about how you write. You know, you're writing about real creatures, but you always seem to bring out the wonderful stories of their biology, their history, and the ways they feature in myth. But in the background, you also know that they or their subspecies are endangered. How did writing those essays then make you feel? Because on the one hand, you're living not necessarily in an imaginary world, but in this fantastical, wondrous world. And you also know that time may be limited for them and for us to be on this planet with them.
I think it is such a question that faces anybody who loves the living world, that our love is colored by knowledge that we are the greatest force of destruction that the world has ever known. And we are at risk of ending with near empty skies and near empty seas if we do not just so much more urgently than we are currently moving reverse the trend towards extinction. Gnolls are near threatened, but many scientists believe that might be overly optimistic. And the main threat to them is climate change. The ice cover is melting too quickly for them to adapt, so they'll have nowhere to hide from the whales, nowhere to feed. And they communicate by clicks and buzzes. And shipping has rendered the ocean so loud that we risk rendering anything in the ocean which communicates by clicks, buzzes, small vocalizations, mute to each other. And I think anybody who looks at the natural world and sees that it is something strange and extraordinary and infinitely more intelligent than we yet know has that doubleness of knowing that it is us who have put them at risk.
It's an interesting choice insofar as, of course, all kinds of people speak of endangered species, and they do it in all kinds of ways. Sometimes it's, in a more sort of lecturing sort of way, or in a more very fact-based, here's what you need to know. But your ability to spark wonder in these animals amid the threats they face from climate change, it's a different sort of tack. And I'm sure you've thought about how I'm going to approach this, yeah?
Yes, so the hope was There are spectacular books by scientists about the immediate urgency of climate change. And if you need a book packed with scientific rigor, there are so many. And so I thought what perhaps I could offer would be a book that is readable with jokes, with a sense of the extraordinary, the strange, the bewildering. I was hoping to woo people, to lure people in. In England I say, give this to your conservative grandfather, your conservative uncle, people who might not fully be willing to engage with something like David Wallace Wells's The Uninhabitable Earth, but might be willing to read an essay about the fact that there was a seal in Maine who learned to speak English. That sometimes you can lure people in with stories. It is what stories have always been able to do, both for good and ill. Stories can move a generation.
Speaking of conservative grandfathers, after Donald Trump won the U.S. election last month, and knowing he's vowed to back out of the Paris Climate Agreement, you have decided to donate 100% of all your author royalties earned from this book, Vanishing Treasures, to climate charities, and you're going to do that in perpetuity. Catherine,
Yes.
You've had success as a writer, but that is a sacrifice on your part.
Financially, yes, writers don't make that much money, but equally, and I know also, I'm not naive. I know that faced with the billions of Elon Musk donating what might a book make in its lifetime, if you're lucky, maybe a few $100,000, but generally less, it won't make a huge difference. But sometimes protest needs to be done in order to remind yourself that you mean what you say and to prove it to others. Because in the same way that certain forms of dishonesty are contagious, so are certain forms of protest.
I'd like to end our conversation by thinking about sort of the two sets of creatures you've been living with in your mind, in your imagination, maybe in some ways in reality, in that when you write about things and think about them, they become very real to you. The mythical ones and the very real threatened ones. What have you learned about the creatures that are humans after spending so much time in your mind with mythical creatures and other creatures?
So I often think of the fact that human beings, we are breathtaking in our foolishness, our stupidity, our cruelty, our capacity for damage. But we are also spectacular in our capacity for change, for transformation, for care, for love. And I do believe that, truth, even truth temporarily defeated, is stronger than a lie. And there is this fact about humanity, which is that we are bioluminescent. There are the chemical reactions within the human body. They cast up photons, which are the elementary particle of light. And it's very weak. We can't see it. It's 1,000 times weaker than human eyesight. But we are glowing all the time, without stopping, from the day we are born to the day we die. And that glow is clustered around the face. And when I think of humanity, I think of us as so faulted, so exhausting, but nonetheless radiant. And I do continue to believe in humanity. I often think of Antonio Gramsci, the great philosopher. He said when he was arrested for pushing back against the fascist regime, he'd been in prison for 3 years, and he said, I am a pessimist because of intellect, because of intelligence, but I am an optimist because of will. And I feel that we need a willed optimism in the years ahead.
It has been just fantastic to listen to you, and so many good reminders in the world in which we find ourselves. And I just want to thank you very much, Catherine.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you.
Catherine Rundle is the author of Impossible Creatures and Vanishing Treasures.
Story category of refugees, and whether they return, can depend on everything from personal to financial matters. But I think it's also a test to whether or not they establish a strong sense of belonging in the country that they go to. And I think Canada's done a relatively good job in that sense. And so I don't think we're going to see a lot of Syrian refugees that came to Canada leave, because I think we really work on creating that sense of belonging. We've got lots of challenges. I'm not suggesting we're perfect, but in Europe, that has been a problem. Discrimination and racism is much higher there. The experience there for a lot of Syrian refugees is different. And I think the one place we're going to see, and I agree with Kareem, people from Turkey returning, but other within the Middle East itself, within the neighboring countries, where there isn't a strong sense of belonging for them, despite the sort of similar cultural experience. But unfortunately, the discrimination in whether it's Lebanon, Jordan, and Turkey is quite high. The lack of rights and status in those countries is going to, I think, induce them to want to leave too. So I think there are many, factors that will, determine whether or not people return. But certainly, I think it's too early to make a definitive judgment that now Syria is either safe to return to, or that Syria is stabilized in termes of the position of the people there.
Besma and Karima, thank you both for your analysis this morning. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
Besma Momani is a professor of political science at the University of Waterloo and also a senior fellow at the Center for International Governance and Innovation. Kareem Shaheen is an editor with New Lines magazine. He has covered the Middle East as a correspondent for The Guardian in Beirut and Istanbul. I'm Pia Chattopadhyay. This is the Sunday Magazine on CBC Radio and streaming live on the CBC News app. Just go to the local tab and press play wherever you are. You can also find and follow us wherever you get your podcasts. Now, if you exchange gifts over the holiday season, you may be in full-on panic shopping mode right now, or maybe you're one of those organized early shopper types who's already crossed off all the names from your list. Either way, holiday presents are the theme of our latest That's Puzzling Listener Challenge, an opportunity to play our monthly word game on air in January. We invited you to invent a made-up word for a holiday gift you open and instantly know you're going to return. As usual, dear listeners, you delivered plenty of great gifts to our inbox. Kai Cunningham writes, my word for a holiday gift you open and instantly know you're going to return is Yule let down. That is a combo of Yule, Y-U-L-E, and let down. Kai's example, my mom's gift this year was a total Yule let down. Why would I have any need for fluffy zebra socks? Mary Lang says she would call such a gift a presentment because it's a present that causes resentment. Dylan DeVikis in Sudbury, Ontario, who always sends in great letters, submits two ideas, writing, how do you like the word package? It is like a Christmas package, only you know it's going back to the store. I have received a few of these, and without a receipt, they become a return over. Julia Schneider also has two made-up word ideas, no keeper-el, breaking up the word Noel and inserting keeper. She also offered up regiftogram. Ken Tuff in Port Moody, BC says, those gifts you instantly know you're going to exchange are many snappy returns. Jean Hughes in Toronto's word is missile throw. Susie Vaught in Prince George, BC combines the words relinquish and gift to make relinquift. And Pam Dixon came up with no-no, spelled K-N-O-W-N-O. So when you know a gift is going to be a no, it's a no-no. She also thought of open shutter. I'm wishing Pam and all our listeners 0 shutters when they open gifts this year. Keep those letters coming. We love to unwrap them. Once again, your challenge is to make up a word for a holiday gift you open and instantly know you are going to return. You can email us sunday@cbc.ca. Put "That's Puzzling" in the subject line. Please include your phone number. You have until midnight tonight to do so if you want a chance to play on air in January. And that could get you a coveted Sunday Magazine coffee mug or notebook. You can stream all past rounds of That's Puzzling, cbc.ca/Sunday. And once you get there, just hit That's Puzzling at the top of the page. This is the Sunday Magazine. I'm Pia Chattopadhyay, and it is a time of year when many of us are trying to recapture some of the wonder of the world, that wonder that we felt as kids. Catherine Rundell has a special gift for doing just that. As a children's writer, Catherine has been piling up accolades and devoted young readers at home in the United Kingdom in recent years, and now increasingly around the world as well. They're enchanted by the world Catherine's created in her breakout book, Impossible Creatures. It's an adventure story set in a world where mythological beings, griffins, unicorns, dragons, they're all real. But this season, Catherine is also hoping to make us grown-ups pause and wonder at some breathtaking creatures that are very real, but also threatened with extinction. They are featured in Catherine's new book. It's called Vanishing Treasures. Catherine Rundell, good morning to you.
Good morning. Thank you so much for having me.
It's lovely to have you with us. You know, on top of sparking wonder with your books, you're also a scholar, a fellow at Oxford University's All Souls College, where you research Renaissance literature. And that, to me, sounds like a dream come true for a certain kind of bookish, library-loving person, is it?
It has been a real joy to get to spend so much of my life reading and thinking about what it is that books might be able to give us. And I just have a real love for libraries, even the ones that smell of, Dettol or feet. I still just love a library.
Sorry, I can't stop laughing at Dettol and feet. And so what is it about a library that you just not only feel at home, but you have so much wonder when you're in one?
Well, if you think about it, a library, especially some of the libraries I'm lucky enough to spend my time in, they are a repository for thousands, literally thousands of years of our best jokes, our most radical thoughts, our most nuanced visions of what it is to be a person. And we have put them down on paper and laid them out for people to gather up and find for themselves. And so in that sense, a library feels to me really like a room full of 1,000 beating hearts. It does. If you think about it, it can get quite overwhelming how extraordinary it is.
So I think we've got done away with this exam, but my understanding is that when you were admitted into All Souls, this was back in 2008, one of the things that you had to do is you have to write an essay, 3 hours of writing an essay, here's the catch, on a single word. Is that true?
That is true.
What was your word?
It was novelty, and I think I wrote about Christmas crackers, the sort of, the novelty joke, and also a little bit about Derridean deconstructionist theory. And I think, in fact, I'm pretty sure they let me in despite that essay rather than because of that essay. I would really cringe to read it now. I was 21, and I think it had all the worst things of being 21 rammed into it.
I think it's probably pretty amazing. I'd love to read it. I'd love to read it. So there you were, you're at this esteemed school, you're studying serious stuff. So when you say to your fellow scholars, look, my passion is writing books for children, what were the reactions?
A huge variety. Some of the fellows were not just supportive, but excited, and believed very powerfully in what children's fiction can do. And a few perhaps felt less so. Oxford has always had people who are more traditional in their vision of what people should be doing. But I was very lucky in that one of the people who was my greatest support and mentor at college, a man called Colin Burrow, happens to be the son of one of Britain's finest ever children's writers, Diana Wynne Jones. So when people would say, she can't waste her talent writing books for kids, he was very much able to say, I think you'll find it's not a waste.
Not only that, then you went on to sort of stick it to your naysayers in a kind way, though, because you write a book called Why You Should Read Children's Books Even Though You Are So Old and Wise. In a nutshell, what was your case?
So it argues that children's fiction is the literature that deals most immediately and vividly with the imagination. And the imagination is something that in adulthood sometimes we can treat as an optional extra, something that you can safely discard, something fine for kids, but not really for us. But imagination is the sharpest tool of ethics. It is the condition precedent for political change, for any kind of enduring love. And so the argument is if you find your imagination starting to falter and the world looks like it cannot be bent out of the shape it is in, then a children's book can be a kind of defibrillator for the imagination. It can shock your heart back into belief that there are uncompromising truths about being a person, about endurance and hunger and love, and that reading a children's book might push you back towards them.
I just want to play that in loop because we spend a lot of time, and everyone who listens to this program knows, and people feel this. The world, I don't know, in recent times feels very heavy, perhaps especially heavy. And so, what a salve. We'll talk about your latest children's book in a sec. It's all about imaginary creatures. But I want to talk about Catherine, you as a kid, because I think there's a connection. You grew up surrounded by some fantastic wild animals and nature, very different from the ones that you would find in either England or Canada. Take us to your childhood.
I was very lucky in that my father worked in international development. And so some part of my childhood, between about 8 or 9 and 14, I was in Zimbabwe. And in Zimbabwe, there is just so much more life adjacent to human life. You know, like the parliament of the non-human is loud in Zim. And so there would be, you know, snakes in the garden occasionally and scorpions under the rocks. And one of the shopping centers would have monkeys in the trees nearby. And just half an hour's drive away, you would see real wild things, you know, rhinos and giraffes and zebras, and a sense of the world as just thrumming with life that is not human life. And so you grow up with a sense that, yes, humans are miraculous and extraordinary and difficult and strange, but we do not live in this world alone. You grow up very vividly with a sense of the world as shared.
I'm assuming that's where your sort of genesis of the natural world was formed. Maybe you had some before, but I can imagine being in an environment where you're just awestruck by so much.
Absolutely. And I think when you're young, things do strike you to the marrow. They do really startle you. You know, a bird, a frog, a lizard, a snake. They sort of capture you and they don't let go. The hold they have on the childhood imagination is very powerful. And I had always loved animals. I was very much one of those kids with, you know, pictures from National Geographic tacked to their wall with blue tack. But you know, to be able to see it live and see its wildness, you know, you also learn very quickly that animals are not at the service of us, that they wish largely to be left alone, which you discover in some ways painfully when you're quite young.
Yeah.
You know, they've been bitten by many, many things.
So, listen, you could have written your most recent book about the kudus and the zebras and all those wonderful animals that you were surrounded by when you were a kid. But you didn't. Your latest book, Impossible Creatures, is full of these fantastical beings from different mythologies. Dragons, griffins, unicorn. Where did you find all the creatures to populate this world?
It was the most joyful time of my working life. I think I spent hours and hours, more than 100, about the way our world stands now and the urgency with which these living things are needing our care. And the book says to children, your endurance, your work, your dedication, your fight, your rage, your love, your care, they will be worth it. Even if you cannot see at the time that they are worth it, they are still worth fighting.
If you're just joining us on this Sunday morning, I'm Pia Chattopadhyay, and I'm speaking with Catherine Rundle, a scholar, writer of books for children and adults, and a purveyor of wonder. There's sort of this through line from the fantasy world of impossible creatures, that the creatures are endangered because the magic is fading away. But you've been writing about real creatures in our world that are in danger of going extinct. Your new book, Vanishing Treasures, is all about them, from wombats to giraffes, and a creature found in Canada's Arctic waters, the narwhal, or sea unicorn, as some people have nicknamed it. It's got this long, fantastic tusk. It does feel like, I don't know, like an impossible creature itself, doesn't it?
It does. I have a friend who's a professor at Oxford of philosophy who admitted on reading my book that until reading it, he had thought that narwhals were fictional. Because they are very like unicorns, and we used to believe they were the unicorns of the sea, and Queen Elizabeth I was given a narwhal horn studded with rubies and diamonds and emeralds, and told it was, a horn of the unicorn of the ocean.
Oh. Do we know what the horn of a narwhal is for?
Well, there are many, many debates about it. It can't be absolutely necessary for survival.
That's creating some tension.
Okay, Molly, I think you're actually starting to get into this week's story.
Yep. We're heading back to Alaska this week, Laura.
Okay, well, before we get to it, I'm Laura Lynch, and this is What on Earth, where we bring you a world of climate solutions.
Today, as climate change alters weather patterns, heats up the race to mine for the materials for green technology, and puts added pressure on fish and the habitat they live in, is cooperating across borders a climate solution?
We'll talk to the Mining Association of BC a little bit later, but first, you take it away, Molly.
I'm going to take you to Southeast Alaska, where Indigenous nations have come together to demand a seat at the table on the decision-making about mines in northwestern British Columbia. I'm going to introduce you to 3 people, what action they're taking, what's at stake, and how climate change is part of the story. Let's start with Fred Olson Jr., who I met in Sitka.
Kuthgansi Hinodikyam. In the Haida language, my name means place of one's own. And I'm Frederick Olson Jr. I'm on the Sitka Tribe of Alaska's Tribal Council and their representative to the Southeast Alaska Indigenous Transboundary Commission.
The Southeast Alaska Indigenous Transboundary Commission is a group of Alaskan tribes concerned about the health of 3 rivers, the Unuk, the Stikine, and the Taku, which all meet the Pacific Ocean in Southeast Alaska, but they have their headwaters in northwestern BC.
And it's salmon habitat, isn't it?
Oh yeah, there's 5 species of salmon that spawn in these rivers, as well as another fish that moves from fresh to salt water called ulican or uligan.
The fish in the water is not looking at some boundary. They get moved by tide, what have you.
The Southeast Alaskan tribes are worried about the impacts mines and proposed mines in BC could have on these rivers.
Right, and obviously the fish who actually live in them.
Yeah, so you'll be talking with the Mining Association of BC later, but briefly, if you look at the BC government website, they do have a page dedicated to the importance of what they call critical minerals used for green technology. So that includes things like copper, lithium, nickel, and cobalt. Now, this region of northwestern BC near the Alaska border is known predominantly for copper, but also silver and gold.
Right, in fact, it's often called the Golden Triangle.
Exactly.
We understand you want gold and all this, but at what cost? For them, it's a cost of doing business, but for us, the loss might be, there's no more Unuk. Oh, well. It's not just the loss of Hooligan, which would be devastating, but again, it's way of life.
I know for a lot of First Nations in BC, Hooligan, there's different names for it around the region. The fish, Hooligan, and salmon species are just so culturally important.
Right, and in BC, there is a consultation process with First Nations on mining projects, but that's not the case for Indigenous people across the border in Alaska when it comes to those projects happening in BC. And this is why the group has been trying to get both the provincial government of British Columbia as well as Canada's federal government to include them in the environmental assessment process for mines that are upstream. Now, one of the rivers I mentioned is the Unuk, I want to introduce you to another person, someone whose family has fished on that river going back thousands of years.
I'm Louis Widener Jr., born in Ketchikan, grew up with our people here in Metlakatla, Alaska, the only reservation in Alaska. And I've spent I got a birthday coming up here, February 4th, and I'll be 77 years old. And this is home, and will always be home. I'm Simsian, I'm Tlingit, and German. My grandfathers, they were well-known boat builders that came from Canada.
Okay, so I know that our listeners can't see this, but Laura, can I just show you a photo that Louis sent me quickly?
Sure.
This is Louis's family crest, painted on the rock along the edge of the Unic River.
It actually, it looks kind of faded and old. Has it been there a long time?
Oh, yeah.
It's a sun with two circles on it, and it has the sun rays coming off of it. And only the bottom part is wore off from when the glaciers were coming out. And it's amazing that it is still there.
So that sounds like it's been there, thousands of years?
He told me that research had dated it back like 10,000 years. And there are actually two of his family's crests on the river.
It's high on the bluff where our people mark the territory, and under our Tlingit law, that belongs to the family I belong to on the Sanyuquan of the Tequadi.
The Unic is where he learned to fish for Ooligan. Every March, he would go to the river.
Yes, it was very cold, a lot of snow. When we go up in March to get our Ooligans, the net would freeze if we didn't make a set right away. So it was beautiful.
They would bring back Ooligan to the community. It was a celebration. People would prepare it and eat it and preserve it and make grease from it.
From our culture, I grew up as a child with my oldest brother, bringing the Ooligan home to our communities. And first day in, the whole town would have their frying pans on, and you'd fry the fish fresh. Next day, every house here in Metlakatla at that time had a smokehouse. So we preserved them, and to get them so you had them till the next March when you'd get the fresh ones again. So it's very important to our culture.